They think I'm still drifting, a temp, a freelancer, someone who couldn't hold a real job if her life depended on it. Tomorrow, at precisely 9 a.m., I'll be seated at the executive table of Mercier Capital, the financial giant my brother-in-law has been clawing his way through for years. He'll be presenting a proposal he thinks will land him a senior VP spot. He has no idea I'm the one reviewing it, the final risk gatekeeper, the one with signature authority. I haven't told them, not Ruth, not Josh, not my stepfather who still calls me kiddo like I never grew past 19. Let them laugh, let them offer pity disguised as politeness over Thanksgiving dinner tonight. Because tomorrow, when the CEO introduces me as Director Elena Torres, when I ask Josh to clarify his numbers in front of his mentors and peers, the room will go quiet, and that silence, it will say everything. Tomorrow I walk into their boardroom and they'll call me Mom. But tonight I sit quietly at my sister's dinner table while they still think I'm just floating. The porch was spotless like always, wreath-scented, welcome mat aligned, not a leaf out of place. I stood there for a second, pie tin in my hands, and let the cold settle into my coat sleeves. It had been 4 years since I last stepped onto Ruth's property, felt longer. She opened the door before I knocked. Her smile was polished, practiced, the kind people wear when they know exactly how good they look. "Eleanor, you made it." I nodded. Barely missed the traffic. Inside, everything was symmetrical. Furniture that matched. Candles that flickered just enough to say autumn warmth. Every inch designed for appearances. The smell of nutmeg and control drifted through the air. I placed the pie on the counter next to a casserole dish labelled with Ruth's handwriting, like it was part of some museum exhibit. From the living room I heard the low hum of football commentary. Then laughter, deep and familiar. Josh and my stepfather. "Elena," he called out as I stepped into view. "Look at you. Still our little nomad, huh?" He didn't get up, just gestured vaguely toward the couch, drink in hand like he expected me to perform gratitude for his attention. Josh glanced up from his phone, gave me the kind of nod you'd give a stranger at a gas station. "Hey!" It landed like a slap, but I smiled. Ruth handed me a wine glass I didn't ask for. "So," she said, brushing an invisible speck off her pristine blouse, "still doing contract work?" I met her eyes. "Something like that." She didn't push, just turned to check the oven, her heels tapping a rhythm I remembered too well. Sharp, efficient, always in control. The table was set for 6, gold trim, linen napkins folded into perfect triangles. There was no card for me, but I already knew where I didn't belong. I took the chair farthest from the head of the table, farther still from the people who'd decided long ago that I'd failed them. They asked me about my life, like they were checking a box. But they didn't really want to know. They never had. They used to say I was the smart one. I got into Harvard straight out of high school, early admission, full ride, even a nod in the local paper. For about 5 minutes, I was the family's pride. The bright future, they called me. But then Nana got sick, the kind of sick that needed someone there. Not just doctors, but a presence. Someone who could lift her, feed her, hold her hand when the morphine stopped working. Ruth couldn't. She had a wedding to plan. My stepfather had business trips. And my mother, she was already fading out of the picture by then. So I left Cambridge at the end of the sophomore year, told myself I'd go back after the summer, after Nana. She died in late August. I didn't go back. I remember one night in particular. My mattress was on the floor of a basement rental in Dorchester. Pipes rattled every time someone upstairs flushed. I'd eaten a can of cold soup straight from the tin and wrapped myself in Nana's old blanket, pretending it was enough. There were no emails then, no degrees, no titles, just me. and the sound of silence so loud it felt like judgment. That was the night I promised myself something. They won't see it now, but one day they'll have no choice. They never forgave me for that, not because I dropped out, but because it messed with their narrative, because I stepped off the path they built in their minds. No more Ivy League, no corporate internship, no cocktail bragging rights at Josh's office parties. Instead, I stayed behind, took care of the estate, worked temp jobs, learned to live on less than pride, and slowly, quietly, I started building something they couldn't see. It started with data entry for a security firm, then certification in compliance auditing, then nights spent studying risk metrics while Ruth posted about wine pairings. Eventually I landed a junior analyst role at a small firm in Boston. I never told them. There was nothing to prove anymore. Meanwhile, Ruth married into wealth. Josh rose fast in finance, always the youngest guy in the room, always talking louder than anyone else. They bought a house in the suburbs with quartz countertops and an HOA that emailed monthly newsletters. I got my master's in digital risk from NYU. No one came to graduation. I sent the invite. I even followed up. Nothing. Later, when I published my first white paper on decentralized asset vulnerability, I emailed it to my stepfather. He never replied, but I saw he opened it. Twice. He liked to say, "You had potential, Elena. Pity you never used it." Maybe that's what stung the most, not the criticism, the certainty that I'd failed because I didn't succeed the way Ruth did, married, polished, name-tagged at company galas. They thought I was drifting, but I wasn't. I was working, building, learning to become someone whose name would show up in footers of policy memos they didn't even know existed. Someone who'd eventually sit in the seat that decided which risks were too costly, including people like Josh. I didn't want revenge. I wanted to be seen. "You had potential. Pity you never used it." That was the last thing he said to me the day I packed my things and left their house. But I did use it, just not in the way they expected. Dinner at Ruth's house always felt more like a performance than a meal. The table looked professionally staged. Gold-trimmed plates, hand-lettered name cards, tapered candles that hadn't burned long enough to drip. Every dish sat at perfect right angles, like someone had used a ruler. Ruth probably did. I took the seat without a card, far end, nearest the window, the one no one had to look at. Josh sat at the head, already mid-sentence, one hand wrapped around a Bordeaux stem, the other gesturing like he was giving a TED talk. His voice filled every corner of the dining room, loud enough that it covered the absence of anyone else speaking. "So next week's the big pitch," he said, slicing into the turkey like it was an opponent he was about to outmaneuver. C-suite strategy presentation, 45 minutes, all eyes on me. My stepfather leaned in, alert like a hound catching the scent of status. "That's for the global infrastructure proposal, right?" "Exactly," Josh grinned. "Cross-border asset flow, decentralized lending risk, algorithmic model optimization, the whole thing." Ruth beamed, resting her hand on his forearm like he was the golden goose. "He's been prepping for months," she added, practically glowing. "Even cancelled our Napa trip so he could tighten the deck." I kept my mouth shut and reached for the cranberry sauce. Then, as if on cue, Ruth turned to me. "Elena, how about you? Still bouncing around? That consulting thing?" "Something like that," I said. She smiled, pleased with her own memory. "Didn't you say you were in Chicago a while back? Or was it Denver?" "DC. "Oh, right." She waved it off. "You've always been adventurous." It wasn't a compliment. Josh took a sip of wine and said, "Honestly, I don't know how you do it. That kind of lifestyle. No real stability, no upward momentum, no exit strategy. It hit like a casual slap, the kind you're expected to laugh off because it's wrapped in a napkin of concern. I didn't answer. He launched back into his pitch rehearsal, outlining his model as if he were unveiling a masterpiece. I listened, not because I cared, but because something caught my ear. His language, his phrasing, was familiar. Too familiar. Red vector thresholds, layered latency analysis, failure state modelling. He was quoting a risk protocol I'd written. I froze. He mispronounced 2 of the acronyms, misused a 3rd. His timeline for escalation was off by a week. I had authored the original report 3 quarters ago under the Strategic Risk Division, classified internal use only. I'd seen who had access. Josh was not on that list. I kept chewing. Slowly then came the kicker. A graph he described, a heat map matrix, matched exactly one I'd built. It had been attached to a defence advisory deck I sent to Mercier's executive team last spring, and now he was using it, without context, without attribution, without knowing I'd be in the room on Monday. He didn't know. None of them did. The stuffing on my plate turned heavy. My vision narrowed like the air in the room had thinned. I wasn't angry, not yet, just activated. A switch flipped that I'd forgotten was even there. I'd watched Josh manoeuvre around people for years. Smile big, talk fast, make himself indispensable. He was good, but not good enough to know the source of the data he was trying to sell. Not good enough to see the crack he was standing on. And definitely not good enough to know I'd be the one evaluating him. Not yet. The clinking of silverware filled the silence I left behind. Ruth passed the sweet potatoes. Josh poured himself more wine. My stepfather leaned back in his chair, content and proud, like the world made perfect sense to him from his seat at the table. But in my head, I was somewhere else, 2 years earlier. The room was fluorescent, windowless. Just me, a terminal, and a compliance audit no one else wanted to touch. I found it by accident. Josh had misfiled a risk report on a liquidity buffer projection, minor on paper, but it masked a breach that nearly cost Mercier 6 figures. Someone higher up had overridden the flag, and the whole thing slid beneath the radar. Except it hadn't. I'd seen it. I could have escalated. Should have. But Josh called me from a blocked number that night. "Eleanor, listen. This would tank the quarter. Just, please, don't make it a thing." I didn't. I was new, temporary, disposable. My name wasn't even on the internal org chart. So I flagged it quietly, fixed the numbers, and never mentioned it again. He never said, "Thank you." He never even acknowledged it. He probably thought I'd forgotten. But I hadn't. And now he was using my language, my framework, my voice, and he didn't even realize I still had the mic. I looked up. He was laughing at something Ruth whispered. My stepfather raised a toast to visionaries and family men, and I sat there, steady, composed, practiced. It's easy to disappear when people are too busy watching themselves. Josh leaned across the table. "You know, Elena, I keep saying it. People like you are lucky. No pressure, no big decisions, just freedom. But in high-stakes environments, that kind of loose structure doesn't last." I met his gaze. Just for a second, enough to let it linger. "I've survived worse than your boardroom." I didn't say it aloud. I didn't need to, because this wasn't the place. They wouldn't believe me, not here, not now. It would become a family squabble, another round of Elena thinks she's special. But Monday morning wouldn't be up for debate. I already had the agenda, already reviewed his pitch materials, already saw the inconsistencies, the recycled phrasing, the blind spots, and I'd be sitting 2 seats down from the CEO, with the final say. Josh finished his wine. Ruth topped him off. My stepfather asked if anyone wanted pumpkin pie. I declined. I'd lost my appetite somewhere between the misused metric and the borrowed chart. They went on talking, planning, laughing, and I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, eyes calm but burning. Because when the world doesn't see you, there's only one thing to do. Let them. Until the moment you walk into the room they think they own, and take your seat at the head of the table. The next morning I walk into that high-rise, and everything changes. The air smelled like eucalyptus and glass cleaner. 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes earlier than I needed to be, but right on schedule. The headquarters of Mercier Capital towered over the block, all chrome and mirrored windows, a building that looked like it didn't just host money, but printed it. I stood across the street for a moment, just breathing. My tailored black suit was crisp, structured, not too flashy, not too soft. The lapel pin shimmered against the light. A silver badge clipped discreetly at my belt caught the attention of the security officer as I crossed the marble lobby. "Director Torres," he said with a nod. "Boardroom's prepped. Floor 27. I returned the nod. "Thank you." No small talk, no elevator music, just the steady hum as I rose past floors full of people who never once looked behind them. When the doors opened, I was met with a view of the city stretching out behind glass. And directly ahead, Josh, flipping through a digital presentation, stylus in hand, shoulders loose. He was smiling, confident, relaxed. Until he saw me, I stepped forward, heels echoing across the marble. "Elena?" he asked, eyes scanning my outfit. Why are you dressed like that?" He looked around as if someone else might offer a more reasonable explanation. Before I could answer, the glass door to the boardroom swung open. Lorraine Winters, CEO of Mercier Capital, emerged in a navy pantsuit sharp enough to cut glass. She smiled warmly. "Director Torres, I didn't expect you in person." I extended my hand. "I thought it was time." She clasped it firmly. "It's an honor. Everyone, for those who don't know, this is Elena Torres, our Director of Strategic Risk. She'll be evaluating today's proposals, including Mr. Michaels's rollout." Josh stood frozen. The others in the hallway straightened. One cleared his throat. Another nodded awkwardly. Inside, my name already waited on a placard at the end of the conference table, next to Lorraine's. I took my seat. Josh entered last. His slide deck flickered onto the projector. The first few minutes were polished. He spoke quickly, but without confidence now. A tremble had crept into his tone. Then came the numbers. His projection for Phase 2 was off. His risk map lacked mitigation thresholds. He quoted a latency margin that hadn't been valid for over 2 quarters. I waited until he finished. "Mr. Michaels," I said, voice steady, professional, "could you clarify how your strategy aligns with the current federal directive on cross-border exposure?" He blinked, looked at his tablet, then at me. I wasn't aware that directive was still active," he said, voice rising half an octave. "I pulled the data from shared resources. I didn't know it was yours." I didn't blink. "That directive was authored by my department." He swallowed. "I can revise it. I'll fix it." "You'll need to," I said. "Resubmit by Thursday. Close of business." "Yes, ma'am." That time he didn't argue. "You'll need to," I said. "Your model doesn't meet the baseline thresholds outlined in Directive 118. There was a pause. Long. Waited. I let it hang before finishing. "That directive was authored by my department." His face drained of colour. "You'll need to resubmit the proposal," I added, "and revise all performance benchmarks. Final draft due by Thursday, close of business." He swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." No one said a word. Then Lorraine cleared her throat and turned the meeting over to me. The next 40 minutes passed in a quiet rhythm. I led the remaining agenda items, offered feedback, answered questions. No one interrupted. No one challenged me. By the time we adjourned, everyone stood a little straighter. Josh gathered his things in silence. Ruth hadn't come, but I could feel her tension through his every movement. I didn't look at him again. I didn't have to. I didn't look at my sister either. I didn't need to. Silence filled in the rest. That night, the city glowed outside my apartment window. Amber traffic lights, distant sirens, a skyline carved in quiet confidence. I sat on the edge of my sofa, still in my suit. The badge was off. The heels were gone. Just me now. No audience, no boardroom, no one to prove anything to. Across the room, my reflection stared back from the glass, not for validation, for peace. I thought about all the years I waited, for a seat at their table, for their applause, their pride. But I didn't need it, because the real shift, the power, was never about making them see me. It was about showing up even when they didn't. They told me I'd never be anything, but the truth is, I became someone even they had to respect. If you've ever been underestimated, don't argue, don't explain, just keep building. And when the moment comes, walk in, take your seat, and let your presence speak. Subscribe for more stories like this, where justice doesn't scream, it whispers